Great. So it gives me immense pleasure to be hosting this session with Divya and Nivedita from Ajivika Bureau. I started reading through the report a couple of days ago, Unlocking the Urban, which is based on migrant labor. And I skimmed through it. I was like, it's a very long report. I will skim through the main pieces and see, what the report entails. And then once I started, I couldn't keep it down and I went through the entire report in detail. And there is more in there than what we can discuss in this one session. To be very honest, there could be 4 or 5 sessions on just each section of the report. So what we're doing today is selecting certain parts and deep diving, trying to get some sense from both Divya and Nivedita on what their views are, what they suggest we should be doing for this. So just to introduce both Divya and Nivedita. Yeah, Divya is a program manager with the Center for Migration and Labor Solutions team. And she leads Ajivika Bureau's policy and partnerships work, engaging with different stakeholders from industry to government. And she worked with IFMR earlier. She's a Fulbright scholar. She has a master's degree from the Harvard Kennedy School as well. And Nivedita she leads the research and knowledge at the Center for Migration and Labor Solutions at Ajivika Bureau. And her research interests are focused on labor laws, urban policy, gender, occupational health and safety. And she's been involved in the collectivization of women migrants who are employed in Rajasthan and Gujarat. So welcome, both of you. And thanks for being here. Divya, if you would like to give us a quick introduction of Ajivika Bureau and the work that they do.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks, Madhuri, and thank you, Intersection, for this opportunity. So just, just a brief kind of overview of what Ajivika Bureau does. So we primarily work with the communities that are dependent on migrant and informal labor. We are headquartered in Udaipur, and we are present across 3 states, that's Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Rajasthan. Our operational model is basically that we work with migrant communities both in the source region, that is the villages, the rural areas from where workers go out, as well as in the destination regions, the high growth kind of urban geographies where they actually go and find employment in these informal labor markets. So we're present in Ahmedabad, Surat, and Rajasthan, Ahmedabad, Surat, and Mumbai. In terms of our work, very briefly, legal aid in order to support informal workers, get access to wages and social security schemes is a major part of our work. Apart from that, we do skill trainings to help workers access kind of higher levels, more skilled jobs in the value chains of these big kind of sectors. We work on primary healthcare, early childcare for migrant families and workers. We enable kind of social security linkages for workers and their families. And all of this is done through the medium of collectivizing these workers into kind of trade-based collectives and worker unions that we register at both source and destination. So these collectives are of both workers as well as women from their families. Apart from that, this report, for example, is a work by our research and policy team. So we have a specialized unit that undertakes specialized kind of work in research and policy issues that affect migrant communities.
Great. Thanks for that, Divya. So I think the flow of the session today is going to be that the first 15 minutes we'll deep dive a little bit into the report itself. And I have a few questions for you. And then we'll move on to policy suggestions that you have that stem some from the report and from your general work with migrants. And then the third part is going to be, what is the role of civil society? So what can organizations say, like Ajivika Bureau or Intersection and other organizations out there, what can they do to assist in this? And then we'll open it up for Q&A. Sounds good. Great. So I think one of the first things that hit me in the report itself when I read it was the word circular migration. So that's something that you mentioned multiple times throughout the report, and those are, I think, the focus group that you studied and that you're working with. So would you want to just explain what circular migration means, and what are like certain aspects of it that the audience should be aware of?
Right. We kind of focused very specifically on this category, circular migrants, particularly to kind of draw attention to the very specific features that circular migrants have, which kind of distinguish them from, migrants like many of us, for instance, or migrants who are able to do a little better off in the jobs that they, kind of are absorbed into in urban areas, or migrants who probably migrate for other purposes like education. So very particularly, circular migrant labor is kind of used to indicate very impoverished kind of rural populations who move into cities for wage-dependent work, or for like non-waged work, like who might be put in self-employed categories. But all of these are very, very marginal kinds of jobs. These are rural populations who are not particularly migrating because they have some kind of specific aspiration in the city, but it's largely distress migration because their traditional livelihoods in their villages have kind of completely died out because of like the capture of their land, water, forest resources by rural elite, by large corporations, which means that these populations have been completely wage dependent. And because there's no investment in agriculture in rural areas, because there's no decent rural job creation per se, they're forced to migrate into these high growth urban sectors, which is where all the country's investment is happening. So because of this kind of uneven regional development where all economic activity is focused in urban areas, people are forced to move into urban areas for work. Interestingly, even when they move into very high growth sectors, which is actually pulling India's economy up, like the construction sector or the manufacturing sector, they end up in jobs which barely pay the minimum wages. So less than 300 rupees, for instance, in a day, despite working very long hours in very hazardous kinds of conditions, such as the construction sector, which is actually one of the most hazardous sectors. India's construction sector is considered one of the most hazardous sectors in the world, accounting for like 16% of all occupational accidents happening across the world. So these are the kind of conditions workers work in, and this has kind of a huge overlap with socially marginalized groups in the country. So circular migrants tend to be overrepresented by Adivasi populations, Dalits, religious minorities. And there's a large number of women as well as children also migrating along with their families or as single women. But again, they're not counted as workers in the spaces where they work. So they again remain not counted at all in any kind of statistic. Even when you look at national statistics, you don't find circular migrants accounted for either in the census or in the NSSO because they're very dynamic in their movements, or they might end up in parts of the city such as their work sites, which is completely isolated from like the public eye or from even the local governments in the urban areas where they work. So they're totally always inside their work sites, or they're in spaces in the city which are considered illegal or criminalized. So that's how the state then views them, which might be open spaces like pavements and the flyovers on land which is publicly or privately owned. Or they might be in very legally kind of constructed rented rooms where even the landlord might not have permission for building construction or might not have kind of legal ownership over the land. So they're again left out of the state's enumeration and usually viewed as illegal or criminal in the city, even though they provide the labor power for like its major sectors.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nivedita. I think very important to understand what distinguishes them from other migrants or distinguishes circular migrants. And just a request, I think thoda Hindi English mix karke agar hum bol sakte hain, that we have both groups with us, so thoda language mix kar lenge, right? When we talk of like circular migrants also, I'll read out an excerpt from the report itself, जिसमें ये लिखा है कि in the absence of voting rights in cities, migrants are stripped of any opportunity to assert their political agency, make demands for migrant inclusive reforms, or stake claims to public entitlements. So when we are talking of political standing, जहाँ पे migrants के पास voting rights नहीं है, या जहाँ जिस स्टेट में वो जा रहे हैं, जो होस्ट स्टेट है, वहां पे वो वोट नहीं कर सकते हैं बिकॉज दे हैव टू गो टू देयर सोर्स स्टेट टू बी एबल टू वोट. इलेक्टोरल पावर नहीं है. उस सिचुएशन में हाउ डज द लैक ऑफ पॉलिटिकल स्टैंडिंग affect these migrants?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question and a very important kind of a feature that distinguishes circular migrants from other kinds of migrants and other categories of urban poor. So migrants के पास फॉर एग्जांपल जैसे आप भी कह रहे थे कि वोट डालने का अधिकार नहीं है, और इसीलिए वो दूसरे जो शहरी गरीब वर्ग है उनसे अलग इस प्रकार से हो जाते हैं. तो one of the major kind of implications of this is again that they are not able to kind of stake claims in the whole urban planning process. For example, in our study we found that one just small example. So they are not so in order to apply for a water post, like a connection to a water tap near their settlements, it has to be routed through the councillor of the municipality. So because migrants are not part of a political constituency, even the very local kind of political actors do not have any incentive to actually cater to the needs and interests of migrant workers. जो प्रवासी जो श्रमिक है उनके पास क्योंकि वोट डालने का अधिकार नहीं है, इसलिए जो बिल्कुल जो लोकल काउंसलर है या एमएलए है शहर का, उनके पास उनके लिए कोई इंटरेस्ट नहीं होता माइग्रेंट्स के क्या नीड्स है, माइग्रेंट्स की क्या जरूरतें हैं, उसको एक्चुअली केटर करने के लिए. तो इसलिए माइग्रेंट्स ये पूरे जो शहरी प्लानिंग का जो प्रोसेस है उससे काफी बाहर हो जाते हैं. They are also not considered as legitimate citizens in the whole imagination of the urban planning process. So जो शहरी गरीब वर्ग है उनके लिए बहुत सारी नीतियां बनाई गई है, हालांकि उनके भी अमलीकरण में, इम्प्लीमेंटेशन में, ग्राउंड में बहुत इश्यूज है. बट माइग्रेंट वर्कर्स के बारे में अगर हम बात करें तो वो पूरी जो कल्पना है, जो शहरी विकास का जो पूरा कल्पना है, उसमें भी ये लोग बिल्कुल एक्चुअली शामिल नहीं होते. तो in many ways like their settlements are for example outside the enumeration process, they're not recognized by the city. तो ये लोकल जो पॉपुलेशन है, लोकल जो आबादी है, उसमें शहरी गरीब की आबादी में माइग्रेंट वर्कर्स कभी शामिल नहीं होते. उनकी जो बस्तियां हैं वो एक्चुअली पूरे शहर की पेरिफेरी में होती है, शहर के बिल्कुल एक छोर में होते. तो कोई भी सुविधा जैसे वाटर है, सैनिटेशन है, टॉयलेट्स है, स्कूल्स है, एएनएम या आशा वर्कर जो आते हैं वो वहां तक पहुंचते नहीं है, उनका एन्यूमरेशन नहीं होता. तो वो पूरी जो नीतियों की जो कल्पना है उससे ही बहुत बाहर हो जाते हैं.
थैंक्स दिव्या. या इस पे मतलब मैंने ये पढ़ा था रिपोर्ट में कि कैसे एएनएम्स सिंगल अगर माइग्रेंट लेबर ज्यादा है तो वहां पे वो चेकिंग के लिए नहीं जाते, आशा वर्कर्स या एएनएम्स भी वहां तक नहीं पहुंचते हैं. तो जो फैमिलीज हैं वो भी पूरा इस प्रोसेस से दे गेट लेफ्ट आउट.
या ये भी है. And one more important kind of way in which the migrant children actually get left out of immunization is that ASHA workers are actually incentivized to immunize the same pregnant woman or the same child on a continuous basis. Again, the policy is very well intentioned because it is only aimed at actually ensuring continuity of service and consistency of service to the same population. But उस process में क्या होता है कि migrant workers जो हमेशा move करते रहते हैं, एक उनका स्थान हमेशा बदलता रहता है. तो ये जो नीति है जिसमें आशा वर्कर की जो इंसेंटिव है वो एक ही गर्भवती महिला या एक ही बच्चे को टीकाकरण करने की जो प्रक्रिया पे निर्भर है, तो the migrant children actually just get left out of this whole process. So which has great impacts on their nutritional kind of well-being, food security, early childcare, health, all of these aspects. एक ये भी है, there was also a study that we did on the political inclusion of migrant workers. This is an old study, it's almost a decade old. But हमने ये पाया था कि migrant प्रवासी श्रमिक जो है वो ज्यादातर इंटरेस्ट रखते हैं अपने गांव के लोकल इलेक्शंस में वोट डालने के लिए. तो क्योंकि हमारे अभी हमारे कंट्री में जो वोट डालने का जो सिस्टम है वो एक ही जगह पे हम डाल सकते हैं. बट प्रॉब्लम इज दैट लॉट ऑफ द सर्कुलर माइग्रेंट्स, एज निवेदिता वाज एक्सप्लेनिंग, they move from village to city, they move from one city to another. So they're constantly mobile, and they lead really multi-local lives between these two kind of spots. That's the village and the city. तो क्योंकि ये लोग हमेशा मूव करते रहते हैं, गांव और शहर के बीच में हमेशा मूव करते रहते हैं, इनकी जो शहर के साथ जो रिश्ता है वो बहुत आर्थिक रिश्ता है. तो सामाजिक और जो राजनीतिक एक रिश्ता एक सिटीजन का होना चाहिए शहर से, वो एक्चुअली बिल्कुल गायब है इनके लाइफ से. सो इनका इंटरेस्ट भी एक्चुअली हमने पाया था एक स्टडी में, that they are actually interested in going back to their villages because all of their investments is really rooted in the village. Cultural and social investments are rooted in the village. So that really means that again, अगर एक ही जगह वोट डाल पाते हैं तो I think that again kind of so a radical kind of re-envisioning is required on all those fronts.
Yeah, I think when we're talking of these migrants, like what Nivedita was saying a little before as well, right? That urban planning mein ya urban cities ke development mein, these migrants are so important. The labor that goes in from one city to other helps to build that entire city's infrastructure, but they are the ones who are left out of the planning. When unke liye planning nahi hoti hai, but they are part of the infrastructure building process. So, like, what do you think that where do they get left out in apart from like not their settlements not being planned or जो infrastructure की आप बात कर रहे थे, उसके अलावा like urbanization and growth की जब बात करते हैं, right? So what are specific, if you can point us to 2-3 areas जहाँ पे आपको लगता है कि उन्हें वापस क्या मिल रहा है for the hard work that they're doing, right? And what are the gaps potentially?
I think it's worth kind of looking at when thinking about urbanization in India, right? India's urbanization rate is very low as compared to like global average. It's like around 30-something%, whereas all job creation in India is in urban areas. So why is it that people are not able to settle in cities? And especially because everyone seems to be working in the cities, and that's where the jobs are. This is where circular migration kind of comes in. What is this preference that employers have for hiring people who do not settle in the city, and certain communities which will always end up having to go back to their villages because they're kind of wholly excluded from this from systems in the cities, or from like kind of building their documentation in the city, accessing services in the city. What we have to understand is that circular migrants, when they're hired through very long kind of chains of contracting, which means that they'll be taken to the city by a village level kind of contractor who will be a petty contractor. Then, they're kind of aggregated in the city by a bigger labor contractor. Then they're brought into the sites through, like when we looked at Ahmedabad, there were almost 9 links in the chain between like the principal employer, who's like the builder, and the migrant labor at the end. So what we kind of understand is that across sectors, there's this preference for circular migrant labor particularly. And this is because it's very easy then for industry to not provide services for them, for employers to kind of, cut costs by probably not paying minimum wages, by not investing in health, not investing in welfare, not investing in their housing in the city, because they have nowhere to go. They're excluded from trade unions in the cities, which are largely comprised of local kind of organized workforces. They don't have social support systems in the cities. They're completely isolated again from, urban local bodies or other authorities like the labor department or the police, which is very hostile again towards migrants, kind of reflecting the social sentiments that we have towards migrants, which are the criminals, there's ethnic-based stigmatization. So for a group of people who have no way to demand their rights then from their employers, it makes it very easy for employers to produce cheaply by cutting costs on what they should be spending on labor welfare and on payment of fair wages. So there's a preference for circular migrants and for keeping them that way. And the state, very what our experience with talking to urban kind of local bodies in Gujarat and in other states is that they say this is the responsibility of industry, because industry is gaining from labor. Industry is the one who's hiring them. So why isn't industry doing anything? So there's a complete kind of wash off of responsibility. We were very clearly told that migrants are not citizens; they're not urban residents because they don't pay taxes, or they are not, again, if they're poor populations or urban poor, they're not voting poor. So why is it then the mandate of urban local bodies? And most of the work sites are located in industrial areas, which means that they don't even come in the jurisdiction of, again, urban local bodies. So in such a situation, kind of migrants are left out both from employer provided welfare, which is actually legally mandated, but they have no ways to even prove their relationship with their employer. Because of the long contracting chains, no written contracts, no documentation of their work. And at the same time, they can make no claims on urban local bodies. So they're kind of left out on both ends. All they get from the city is that wage of maybe 300 rupees. But what, in our experience, because we do legal aid for migrant workers, we know that in many instances, even that agreed upon wage, which might be below minimum wage, is not paid to workers. So there's a lot of wage frauds, wage thefts, and on that very, very small daily wage, people have to manage their basic consumption in the city. They end up paying they end up spending, according to our research, around 50% of their income just on food and fuel, which is not adequate. Again, it's just like very basic kind of consumption. And they end up not renting renting homes because they want to save up on that rent and kind of, have some remittances to send back to their households in the villages. So they're kind of pushed into very, 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 very deplorable kind of conditions that have huge impacts on their well-being, which is why, again, our research shows that by the time a migrant is 35 to 40 years old, they fall out of the labor market because of the kind of toxic work environment that they've had to deal with, the extended work hours. They have occupational health issues, which, make them unemployable. And then their children who are 13 or 14 have to enter the labor market, kind of allowing this poverty to be reproduced intergenerationally. And there have been no kind of investment in these children's health, in these children's education, which means that, they're at the same level where their parents started out on when they migrated to urban areas into high growth sectors. So it keeps reproducing this very impoverished kind of workforce that's ready to work at any terms and conditions, at any kind of level of exploitation, because they need that. They need that 200 to 300 rupee wage at the end of the day.
Yeah, there are two questions, Nivedita, that are coming up immediately in my mind. One is the term that you said, right? Like they're not citizens, or we're talking of these are migrant labor. There's another term that is becoming very popular nowadays of guest workers, right? So what is just a quick thought on that of does the way we call them, the way we treat them, change the mindset about these workers? So circular migrants versus a migrant labor versus a guest worker, how does that?
There's a lot of debate actually on, how to refer to migrant workers. We tend to particularly use the word migrant because we want to kind of emphasize on the fact that they remain excluded from urban citizenship. They continue to be migrants over the years, not able to kind of access, what other urban citizens would. But again, yes, reinforcing the term migrants might also then, kind of pave the way for separating them from, other urban poor categories. But I think when speaking on a policy level, looking at the specific needs of, like a circular migrant group, it's also then necessary to speak about them distinctly so that, some of their issues such as, like kind of their mobility, like the fact that, they move so dynamically, and how to kind of address that gets policy attention as well. But I do agree that, it has its issues as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's something we can just take back and think about. There isn't a answer nahi uska ki kya term best hai, but I think ongoing debate hai for that. And I think the second question that jumped up जब आप ये बोल रहे थे, तो एक even within the circular migrants जो हम इस group की बात कर रहे हैं, बहुत vulnerable groups और ज़्यादा हैं. So अगर हम बच्चों की बात करते हैं, या we're talking of women, or we're talking of caste-based discrimination that happens even within these migrant groups, right? So ऐसे कोई specific policy suggestions हैं आपके पास that should be targeted for these more vulnerable groups even among the migrants? So just more targeted कि these are things we can do to ensure that these vulnerable groups have certain policies made for them. So.
So we've discussed this this is like a very extensive kind of question. So I'll just try to, like what we understand is that first of all, women do comprise a very large section of circular migrant populations, unlike, other migrations, because these are very impoverished families. The entire family migrates, which means, maybe two people need to earn to sustain their households. But again, they don't get recorded anywhere. Women who migrate do not, usually what happens is that they get recorded as marriage migrants, and their work goes kind of unacknowledged. If you look at the construction sector, most women who migrate, especially from Adivasi communities, end up in the construction sector with their husbands. But they're very perverse kinds of norms, which are very extra legal, operating in the informal kind of casual contractual sphere of the labor market, which means that women are hired with their husbands. And then, it's called the Jodi system. It's like they're hired as a couple, which means that, the man gets paid for 1.5 labor units, and like the woman is completely like not recognized as a worker. Even when VOCW registrations happen, it usually happens like for the male, but not like there's no specific drive to ensure that, women are captured. So again, women do not get the status of workers in the construction industry. If you look at a lot of migrant women from UP, Bihar, who we look at in, we kind of studied in Surat and Ahmedabad, they are home-based workers, which means that, they're not waged workers, which means they, again, get, they're called entrepreneurs when they're really not entrepreneurs. They're in very survivalist kind of jobs where they're earning like 2,000 to 3,000 rupees per month, even though they end up working all day round in their homes. They get like contracts from agents. They end up like doing really marginal activities like, stitching, removing thread from like textiles, or like, making malas with beads, but they end up working the whole day. They might employ their children to do it with them as well, but there's no recognition again as workers. So I think a very big policy thrust is to be able to, how do we account for women as like a legitimate part of the migrant workforce, and how do we bring kind of recognition to that? The second is, despite, like the ILO kind of commented that India's labor market is the most segmented in the world, which means that even though we have like equal remuneration in terms of equal pay for equal work, what happens with low caste groups and with women is that they are only hired exclusively for very menial, very hazardous jobs. So if you look at, like, for instance, the garments company in Ahmedabad, you will find Adivasi workers doing the most hazardous work, which is like on the boiler, which they end up sleeping near the boiler. They have the children near the boilers. The boiler can explode at any time. It can catch fire. Whereas, OBC and general category kind of workers who are also migrants end up in like, more skilled jobs. So there's this huge kind of barrier for vertical mobility for these workers who end up doing the same kind of menial, very marginal kind of employment throughout their lives. So and that's what happens when we talk about skilling the workforce, right? Because we did attempt skilling of women workers in Ahmedabad, for instance, to these skilled workers in the construction sector. But the thing is that nobody is ready to hire them, because Adivasi women are meant for lifting and carrying work in the construction industry, and they will be paid only so much for it. So, like skilling without like addressing like the deep-rooted kind of patriarchal mindset that has even permeated like very glamorous industries like the construction sector and its recruitments needs to be addressed. And interestingly, what has happened is that, even though we have the Equal Remuneration Act, which kind of prevents discrimination in recruitments between men and women, the new wage code has actually removed that provision. So, like, rather than addressing caste and gender-based kind of discrimination in our labor markets, we seem to be going backwards with our labor reforms agenda currently. So that's a very important point to stress on. And another thing that we noticed with respect to women migrants in the cities is that a lot of the burden of not having public provisioning again falls on women, which means that, if it's a family living in the open, women are the ones who end up having to do a lot of extra unpaid work to be able to ensure that that family is able to survive in very frugal conditions. So our research kind of showed us that women who actually live in the open in Ahmedabad were waking up at 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning just because, because they didn't have a toilet at home, they had to find spots for open defecation before anyone in the city woke up. And women who live near the railway tracks actually told us that, if they were a little late, if they wanted to wake up a little late on a particular day, if the watchman at the railway quarters woke up, they would pelt stones or beat them with sticks. So that's the cost that the woman has to pay for waking up late when there's no other facilities for her to actually use the toilet. And for those communities that were actually able to pay and use toilets, they were spending around 1/10 of their monthly income on paying for the use of the entire household. So the same with water, which means that because women have to it's expected that women provide for the family, they end up sneaking into buildings at 4 in the morning or having deals with security guards of buildings to be able to collect water from the common tap there. They have no idea if they'll be able to get water on a particular day or not. The immense emotional, mental, and physical toll that this has on women kind of goes unrecorded, because the woman ends up subsidizing, for what the state and the industry is refusing to provide for that household. So the centrality of then public provisioning for women's safety, for their dignity and well-being, needs to really be brought back into policy focus.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I'm just thinking of in general, the marginalized groups, women are say marginalized in that, but are there any specific recommendations that we can think? So there was some in policy that you did mention already, and Divya, please jump in if you have anything on this. If there are specific policy recommendations that we want to say for the marginalized groups particularly, that these are 3 things that should be done. One is documenting them, is what you mentioned, so recording their but what else should be done? If you have any suggestions right now, we could.
Do you mean policy recommendations for migrant populations in general, or for these groups?
For marginalized groups, we'll take the ones for the ones in general also.
Okay, yeah. Nivedita, do you want to take that again?
Yeah, so like I was saying earlier, particularly for women, ensuring access to public provisioning. Now, the spaces that migrants live in, again, are not enumerated or recognized by ULBs, but what has to be done is that at the local level, there has to be enumeration, there has to be regularization of these settlements, so that, public provisioning in terms of water, sanitation, healthcare access, and PDS and, subsidized rations is available to them. These 4 things could really make a difference, because on women's kind of time use, on the kind of physical, mental, emotional labor that they have to put into procuring these when there's no other there's no state or employer provided kind of way to access this. This has to be legally mandated. Currently it's not. So there has to be legislations which either mandate the employer to do this kind of provisioning, or mandate urban local bodies to do this. Right now, there's no clarity in who is supposed to provide, which means that the Labor Department and the ULBs can keep engaging in a blame game against each other, and migrants end up slipping through the cracks. Specifically with women in focus, sanitation and water need to be addressed. There are many different ways of doing this. For instance, if a woman is, if a community is living in an open space, it does not mean that sanitation and water connections cannot be provided to them. But currently in policy, the only way to get a water tap or to get access to sanitation is if you have a permanent home. Now, migrants don't have a permanent home, so there's a very kind of ingrained mentality in policy which is very sedentary, which expects people to always be in the city, which expects people to be able to invest in housing in the city, which these groups are not. So enabling different kind of innovative systems to be able to provide sanitation, be able to provide water taps in these spaces, particularly for women. For children also, healthcare access and access to creches becomes a very, very important thing, because on construction sites, again, 80% of the construction sites we looked at in Ahmedabad, even though they were big and employed a large number of labor, did not have creches, which means that women were just roaming around like on very hazardous sites. Women could do nothing. We actually kind of did a time use survey of women to see how many times what all they were doing throughout the day, and we realized that they were not even able to breastfeed their infants because their work was so continuous, and they couldn't take 5 minutes off because the contractor would yell at them for it. So mandating creches on all big construction sites, and if the construction sites are small, then making sure that there are in these industrial clusters or in within the city in migrant hotspots and they all live around their work sites, to have like state funded, state subsidized kind of daycare centers for children. There also needs to be women's resource centers, in particular for women, because there's a rampant sexual harassment in factories, in construction sites where women work, and there's really no space for them to go, because when they go to first of all, as Adivasi Dalit populations are treated very badly by police officials, and on top of that, being a woman makes it almost impossible. So where do women actually be able to report their sexual harassment cases then? Because a lot of women have reported this, where they say they can't do anything because they'll be removed from their jobs, and those contractors might stop employing them and their husbands, and they can't afford that, so they have to keep tolerating it. So there are many specific kind of policy recommendations we could look at. Caste-based discrimination is another one, and we see so many frequent kind of cases where Adivasi Dalit workers are harassed by their contractors. They are threatened by them. Even if they ask for their wages, they get like kind of threatened and abused constantly. But how do you make like the first mile, the last mile access of the state to these communities is police stations, but again they're very unresponsive, and a lot of times migrants get kind of turned away by saying you're not, this is not the jurisdiction of the police station, so go to the next station. Or they're told that wage cases, for instance, are not our mandate, it's the mandate of the Labor Department. But we have so systematically weakened the Labor Department by under-resourcing, understaffing it, that there's no way that anything will move in the Labor Department. So kind of identifying these many avenues that migrants have to seek like redressal of the justice, kind of when such labor rights violations or like sexual harassment happens, creating multiple, which are very sensitive to specific caste and gender-based issues, is really important. Divya, do you have something to add?
No, I think that's it. Yeah, we can also talk more generally about kind of the whole community as well. Yeah.
Yeah, please feel free, Divya. I mean, that was one thing that I picked up in the report as well, that if people who stayed for a little longer in certain areas. So in Surat, I think there was a mention of a woman who stayed there for a little longer, for about 25 years. And they feel that they have a say in the local governance. They feel they have a say in the education that their child receives or not. Right. So what can be done to ensure that, what policy changes can be brought about to ensure that migrants feel like they have a say in the local governance? And tied to that is, who is responsible for providing this welfare, right? So is it the home state? Is it the host state? Is it the central government? So who's actually responsible for ensuring this welfare?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Madhuri. So I think one of the main issues is that a lot of policy formulation actually happens at the central level. So I think the 74th Amendment has not really been implemented in spirit at all. So the urban local bodies really do not have any power currently in terms of, it's not decentralized. The power to make decisions as well as budgetary allocations is currently not decentralized. But given how dynamic the whole issue of migration is, I think there needs to be, from the central level itself, at the central level, there needs to be an imagination of this community, the migrant community, how their vulnerabilities are so unique, but how, again, at the same time it's so severe. So that imagination really has to be part of our policy making space. I'll also kind of say this in Hindi because I know that there are probably people there who are very interested in this. तो जो देश जो बिल्कुल सेंट्रल लेवल पे जो पॉलिसीज बनती है उनकी कल्पना में आई थिंक प्रवासी श्रमिकों का जो श्रम है उसका जो मूल्य है, उनकी जो खास जो जरूरतें हैं वो इंक्लूडेड होना चाहिए, वो शामिल होना चाहिए. अगेन जो शहरी अथॉरिटीज है, जो म्युनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशंस है, उनके पास अभी 74th अमेंडमेंट के तहत कोई भी पावर नहीं है नीतियां बनाने का. अगर उनके ही ज्योग्राफीज में, उनके पर्टिकुलर लोकल कॉन्टेक्स्ट में माइग्रेशन की स्थिति को देखकर उनको अगर कोई रिस्पॉन्स फ्रेम करना है तो उसके लिए उनके पास ना कोई पावर है, ना बजटरी काइंड ऑफ डिसीजन मेकिंग एबिलिटीज है. तो पैसे जो पूरा विकेंद्रीकरण का जो एक आइडिया था 74th अमेंडमेंट के तहत, वो कभी अभी भी वो पूरी तरह से रियलाइज नहीं हुआ है. तो आई थिंक देयर इज अ रियल नीड टू काइंड ऑफ even in this pandemic, even in this response to the corona lockdown, we saw how it was important for the local authorities to have this intelligence or have this information regarding where the migrant hotspots are. बहुत सारे जो calls हमें आ रहे थे वो इसलिए आ रहे थे क्योंकि जो शहरी authorities है वो migrant clusters या migrant hotspots में खाना नहीं पहुंचा पा रहे थे क्योंकि उनके पास information ही नहीं है कि migrants कहाँ रहते हैं. अब ये जो central level पे जो policy making है इसकी एक जरूरी एक खामी है कि वो जो लोकल लेवल पे जो नीड्स है, जो अलग अलग शहरों की अलग अलग नीड्स है, अलग अलग माइग्रेंट को कम्युनिटीज वहाँ पे आते हैं, उनके अलग अलग नीड्स क्या है, उसके बेसिस पे वो लोग सेंट्रल लेवल पे ऑब्वियसली एक अम्ब्रेला लेवल जो लेजिस्लेशन है वो इसको केटर नहीं कर पाती. तो आई थिंक डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन एंड डिवॉल्विंग पावर टू द अर्बन लोकल बॉडीज इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. अगेन अब ये एन्यूमरेशन और रिकग्निशन ऑफ सेटलमेंट्स के बारे में निवेदिता ने ऑलरेडी बात की. तीसरी चीज ये है कि जब माइग्रेंट्स मूव करते हैं तो उनके एंटाइटलमेंट्स वो नहीं एक्सेस कर पाते. सो फॉर एग्जांपल दैट्स द बिग थिंग वी सॉ विद द होल पीडीएस सिस्टम ड्यूरिंग दिस लॉकडाउन बिकॉज देयर राशन कार्ड्स आर रियली नॉट एलिजिबल, नॉट वैलिड इन द सिटी, सो दे आर नॉट एलिजिबल टू एक्सेस फूड ग्रेन्स. तो ये जो पूरी जो आइडिया है कि अगर आप आपके गांव से मूव करते हैं कहीं और राज्य के अंदर हो या राज्य के बाहर हो, तब आपके कोई भी डॉक्यूमेंट्स वैलिड नहीं होंगे, आपके कोई भी एंटाइटलमेंट्स आपको मिलेंगे नहीं. आप जिस नए जगह पे जाते हैं आपको हर बार ये प्रूव करना पड़ेगा कि आप वहाँ के एक लेजिटिमेट सिटीजन हो या वहाँ पे एक लेजिटिमेट प्रेजेंस हो. ये आपको हर बार प्रूव करना पड़ेगा. ये जो एक आइडिया है, ये जो एक बायस है हमारे पॉलिसी डिजाइन में, दिस हैज टू गो. सो दिस सेडेंटरी बायस हैज टू go, and there has to be a universal kind of enabling of access to social entitlements regardless of their domicility in the city, or regardless of their employment status, or regardless of their tenure security. So जहाँ से भी आते हो उनको क्योंकि वो वहाँ पर है, उस शहर में है, उस शहर के निर्माण में भाग लेते हैं, तो उनको वो हक होना चाहिए वो जो भी सर्विसेज है वो एक्सेस करने के लिए. अब ये बस्ती रेगुलराइज्ड हो इस पे निर्भर नहीं होना चाहिए, उनका क्या एम्प्लॉयमेंट स्टेटस है उस पे निर्भर नहीं होना चाहिए. अगर वो एक शहर से दूसरी शहर मूव करते हैं तो हर बार उनको ये एक्सेस होना चाहिए. तो आई थिंक इट रियली रिक्वायर्स अ रैडिकल काइंड ऑफ रीइमेजिनेशन, री-इन्विजनिंग ऑफ द बेसिक फंडामेंटल्स ऑफ आवर पॉलिसी डिजाइन इन ऑल स्फीयर्स. स्वास्थ्य के स्फीयर में हो या अर्ली चाइल्ड केयर, शिक्षा के स्तर पे हो, हर फील्ड में ये एप्लीकेबल होता है क्योंकि हर फील्ड में माइग्रेंट्स और फैमिलीज इस पर्टिकुलर क्लॉज के वजह से रह जाते हैं. अगर हम फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन की बात करें तो वो बैंक अकाउंट नहीं खोल पाते. निर्मला सीतारामन ने जो मेजर्स एक्चुअली अनाउंस किया था एज पार्ट ऑफ द रिलीफ पैकेज, उसमें एक तो पीडीएस इंटेंसिफाई करना था थ्रू फॉर रेशन कार्ड होल्डर्स. अगेन माइग्रेंट्स वर आउट ऑफ दैट, बट ऑल्सो इट ऑल्सो इन्वॉल्व ट्रांसफर थ्रू जनधन योजना, 500 या 100,000 रुपीज का कैश ट्रांसफर थ्रू जनधन योजना. अगेन माइग्रेंट वर्कर्स शहरों में बैंक अकाउंट नहीं खोल पाते क्योंकि उनके पास रेसिडेंस सर्टिफिकेट नहीं है, रेसिडेंस प्रूफ नहीं है. वो या तो कंस्ट्रक्शन साइट्स के अंदर रहते हैं, या होटल्स के अंदर रहते हैं, फैक्ट्रीज के अंदर रहते हैं, या बिल्कुल इनफॉर्मल तरीके के जो बस्तियां हैं उसमें रहते हैं जहाँ पे कोई रेंटल एग्रीमेंट की व्यवस्था ही नहीं है. तो अगेन दे जस्ट जो भी गवर्नमेंट ने इस लॉकडाउन में भी खासकर जो भी मेजर्स अनाउंस किए हैं वो सब जो एग्जिस्टिंग चैनल्स है उसी के थ्रू अनाउंस किए थे, जबकि माइग्रेंट सारे एग्जिस्टिंग चैनल से बाहर है. और I think that is in the realm of social policy. बट अगर हम लीगल पॉलिसी की ओर ध्यान दें, अगर जो कानूनी जो व्यवस्था है हमारे देश में, तो अगेन वो इनफॉर्मल वर्कर्स को, जो असंगठित क्षेत्र के वर्कर्स हैं, उनको कम्प्लीटली उसमें से निकाल देते हैं. इवन दो 93% of India's workforce is actually informally employed, which means that it is not we are not able to establish a relationship between the worker and the employer. तो बहुत सारे चेन्स है, बहुत सारे कॉन्ट्रैक्टर्स है, इंटरमीडियरीज है, मिडलमैन है, जिसकी वजह से तो कौन इसके लिए जवाबदार होगा? अगर स्टेट जवाबदार होगा या एम्प्लॉयर जवाबदार होगा, यही तय नहीं कर पाते. तो ऑन योर क्वेश्चन ऑफ वेदर डेस्टिनेशन, who should be responsible, so I think destination states should be primarily responsible for this, for the welfare of migrants, क्योंकि migrants destination states पे आते हैं, वहाँ की इकोनॉमी के निर्माण में मदद करते हैं, तो they have to really kind of assume responsibility for this. The central government should be responsible in devolving power at the state level and at the city level, and also there should be a legal architecture that actually recognizes the vulnerabilities associated with both informality as well as mobility in their kind of work arrangements, and then cater to the interests of these workers.
Right. Thanks, Divya. That was a lot of pieces that I'm still thinking through, because there's multiple areas where policy is required to be made.
Yeah. But just to add, जैसे निवेदिता ने कहा था, because a lot of them actually slip through the cracks of urban governance या labor governance. तो कौन जवाबदार हो? अगर employers बड़े हैं, construction companies है, बड़े हैं, तो उनको जरूर जवाबदारी लेनी चाहिए. They have to be held accountable for providing services. और अगर छोटे employers है, because lot of जैसे factory units हो, तो बहुत ऐसे छोटे units है जो बिल्कुल registered भी नहीं है, और जो लोग वो units own करते हैं, वो खुद थोड़े पुराने migrants है, but वो ऐसे कोई बहुत बड़े कैपिटलिस्ट नहीं है जो एक्चुअली इनको सर्विसेज प्रोवाइड कर सके. तो उन केसेस में जहाँ पे एम्प्लॉयर्स बहुत छोटे हैं या जो बदलते रहते हैं, जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल कंस्ट्रक्शन वर्कर्स हैं, वो नाकों पे जाते हैं, हर रोज दिहाड़ी में वो रिक्रूट होते हैं. तो अगर एम्प्लॉयर्स ऐसे हैं जो छोटे हैं और अफोर्ड नहीं कर पाते या वो शिफ्टिंग है, तो देन द स्टेट हैज टू स्टेप इन. फिर सरकार की जवाबदारी होनी चाहिए.
We have opened the questions for the audience as well. तो बहुत सारे questions वहाँ से आए हैं. And इसमें I think tying into one of the questions that here कि who are the people who are working for the migrant labor groups, right? So tying into that, where do you think civil society can come in? कहाँ पे हम, जो बहुत सारी संस्थाएं हैं, लोग हैं, तो ऐसे कौन हैं जो इस पे काम कर रहे हैं और हमारा रोल क्या होना चाहिए?
Yeah, there are civil society organizations across India that are working, though I would say that बहुत कम है, I think in the form of actually practice or implementing kind of programs for migrant workers. Yeah, at the very best it would be about 30 or 40 organizations maybe across the country, जो कि इस मुद्दे का जो स्केल है, इसका जो आकार है, उसके कंपैरिजन में ये नंबर बहुत छोटा है. There were kind of sporadic attempts in between by kind of funding fraternity to set up things, but again that did not really pan out very well. But I think as civil society organizations, what we can do is to ensure more purposeful kind of inclusion of migrant communities in their programs, because अभी मोस्टली जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस है वो या तो रूरल एरिया में काम करते हैं या अर्बन एरिया में काम करते हैं. जो माइग्रेंट वर्कर्स है जो इसके कंटिन्यूम में एग्जिस्ट करते हैं, दे मूव बिटवीन रूरल एंड अर्बन एरियाज, दे एक्चुअली गेट रियली they actually fall through the cracks of both these, even for NGOs, because a lot of NGOs also operate in these silos between rural and urban, or it is thematically kind of organized, but again they are all specifically kind of located in either an urban area or a rural area. So I think as civil society organizations, I think the least we can do is to keep our lens open for such communities and purposefully kind of include them. जैसे अगर मुझे पता है आप लोग RTE के implementation में काम करते हैं, तो I don't know आप अभी क्या strategies employ करते हैं, but just to be conscious of this, that जो शहरी जो settlements है, जो slum areas है, जहाँ पे लोग आम तौर पे जाते हैं, जो सामाजिक संस्थाएं जाती है, वहाँ पे शायद ये वर्कर्स नहीं होंगे, उनके फैमिलीज नहीं होंगे, वो शायद कंस्ट्रक्शन साइट्स के अंदर होंगे, फैक्ट्रीज के अंदर होंगे, या शहर के बिल्कुल पेरिफेरी में कुछ बिल्कुल ही अनरिकग्नाइज्ड बस्तियों में रह रहे होंगे. तो वो एक लेंस आई थिंक अडॉप्ट करना विल बी रियली यूजफुल. अगेन अभी ये जो पूरा शटडाउन हमने देखा है और माइग्रेंट्स के ऊपर इसकी जो इम्पैक्ट है, ये हमने देखा है कि दे रियली डिड नॉट हैव एनी सोशल सिक्योरिटी नेट टू फॉल बैक ऑन. तो एक हफ्ते या 10 दिन पैसा नहीं मिला तो बिल्कुल ही गरीबी में वापस एक्चुअली वो लोग चले गए. तो अगेन सिस्टमैटिक काइंड ऑफ इन्वेस्टमेंट्स इन social protection, education, healthcare, and with a lens towards these communities, I think will be helpful.
Right. Thanks. So there's a question from Hitesh that what are sites where you've noticed a successful negotiation between the migrant laborer and the state? तो अभी आप जो मेंशन कर रहे थे कि सोशल वेलफेयर बेनिफिट के लिए वो कहाँ अप्लाई करते हैं या उन्हें पैसे नहीं मिल रहे हैं, तो रजिस्ट्रेशन फॉर द CW, रिसीविंग कैश बेनिफिट्स, ये चीजों के लिए what has been something like a success story that you found? kahan pe, where can they do that?
So yeah, Kerala is of course a very good example for a lot of these things, because wahan pe migrant workers ki ek recognition hai, wahan pe the state is really kind of thinking about, because it also happens to be one of the biggest kind of receiving states in the country. It's one of the biggest destinations in the country. Halaki state bahut chota hai, but I think wahan pe aakar bada hai issue ka. So they have kind of come out with schemes. They have set up some migration support centers. At least there is though a lot of those are not very functional, but at least there is a recognition of this community as a uniquely placed community with its own vulnerabilities. तो वो definitely है. हमारे ही अगर इलाके से अगर एक एग्जांपल दे तो सूरत में जो ओडिया माइग्रेंट्स की कम्युनिटी है, अगेन दैट्स अ हिस्टोरिकल माइग्रेशन स्ट्रीम. वो पावर लूम्स में आते हैं, वो 25, 30, 35 साल से आते हैं ओडिशा में, आई मीन सूरत में ओडिशा से. तो अगेन दे वर एबल टू बिल्ड सम काइंड ऑफ सोशल कैपिटल एंड पॉलिटिकल कैपिटल in the city of Surat, also because their numbers were huge. Surat is the biggest. Surat is been recognized as a city with the maximum percentage of migrant workers. 58% of the population is actually migrant workers in Surat. तो वहाँ पे बहुत सारे प्रवासी ओडिया समूह बने हुए हैं. तो उन्होंने एक्चुअली पॉलिसी लेवल पे, स्टेट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन लेवल पे, सिटी लेवल पे लॉबिंग करके वहाँ पे ओडिया मीडियम स्कूल्स खोले हैं सूरत में. So there are about 7 ओडिया मीडियम schools for children who want to study Odia in Surat. But again उसमें issue ये है कि वो 8th standard तक ही है, तो उसके बाद बहुत सारे ओडिया परिवार से जो बच्चे हैं वो drop out हो जाते हैं. तो but that's still a positive, because that's one of the very few examples that we have in our kind of this thing. अहमदाबाद में जैसे हम लोग जिन माइग्रेंट्स के साथ काम करते हैं, हमारे यूनियन के थ्रू हमने म्युनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन के साथ एडवोकेसी करके वहाँ पे सेटलमेंट्स में मोबाइल टॉयलेट्स और वाटर टैंकर्स की प्रोविजन हमने दिलाया उनको, which was also again a big victory, because otherwise it was not something that is regularly available to these settlements. But then again वही है कि वो कोई पॉलिसी चेंज नहीं है, वो एक AMC में एक ऑफिशियल के गुड बिहेवियर या गुड इंटेंशन और अल्ट्रुइज्म की बेसिस पे वो हो पाया. तो वो कोई पॉलिसी चेंज नहीं है, बट इट्स स्टिल समथिंग. या
डेफिनेटली अ लॉट, मतलब जिनके लिए है उनके लिए तो बहुत बड़ी बात है, आई थिंक, टू हैव दैट टॉयलेट देयर विद देम. कुछ नहीं था. सो या राइट. सो द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज जो एन्यूमरेशन ऑफ सर्कुलर लेबर्स की हम बात करें, सर्कुलर माइग्रेंट्स की, राइट? सो व्हाट इज द बिगेस्ट बैरियर in doing that? So who are the stakeholders who will lose? आपने mention किया था कि it is the employers who don't need to possibly pay them as much अगर ये registered नहीं है and cheap labor available है. इसके अलावा what is the barrier and for which stakeholder will there be an incentive? So apart from the circular migrant themselves, किस और को incentivize कैसे कर सकते हैं? Barrier and incentive both.
Nivedita, do you want to take this? Yeah.
Barriers तो यही है कि urban local bodies don't have the kind of capacity to do it themselves, because जो ज़्यादा migrant settlements है वो शहर के complete peripheries में है. These might be industrial zones. जैसे अहमदाबाद में वो GID गुजरात Industrial Development Corridor के अंदर है, which is outside the mandate of the AMC. A lot of areas which get added onto the AMC later on are actually first kind of developed by the AUDA, which is the Ahmedabad Urban Development Authority. So there's kind of a total bureaucratic a mess with like many institutions, and there are centralized schemes in between, which are doing, which into which all the money is pumped, but not into the ULB, which actually might be able to tackle issues at the local level. So ULB is actually probably what we through our interactions with kind of local level officials, what we understand is that they neither have the capacity nor the resources to even reach to regular urban poor kind of citizens, let alone like migrant workers in the city. So what really is needed then is kind of the devolution of both power as well as of fiscal resources to be able to undertake this kind of, but then again we've moved towards centralization, right? So we have like the Amrit, which is looking at like water and infrastructure. We have Swachh Bharat, which is looking at hygiene and sanity. So everything is like centralized, and these schemes are far removed from like the realities of that particular city, which could be much better tackled at the local level. And then there's no intention. Because migrants are not voters, as we just said. So a lot of access to public provisioning actually happens through kind of elected councillors. But, like you need your councillors kind of recommendation to be able to, for instance, even get like a public water, a public stand post for water. But migrants are not able to even have a conversation with councillors, who actually view them with huge hostility, because local populations are again, who vote for these councillors are again very hostile towards migrants. So creating that kind of mandate for ULBs and then resourcing them to be able to do that. But again, being very focused on making sure that within ULBs, these parochial sentiments, this ethnic kind of bias against migrants is also at the same time addressed, so that like how do you then look at migrants as legitimate citizens also has to be addressed.
If it's okay with everyone, we'll extend the session by 10 minutes. Is it okay with both of you? There are a few more questions on chat. We'll take those.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So I think tied to that same question of incentivizing, universal welfare provision. So Mayurdhar has a question that for when they don't have any political rights, right? हमने अभी बात की कि उनकी political कोई standing नहीं है, क्योंकि vote वो जहाँ host state में है, वहाँ वो vote नहीं कर सकते. तो political stakeholders के लिए क्या incentive है कि इसको वो universal welfare provision दें? Why would they want to do it? If थोड़ा मतलब controversial है कि if we are looking at human life and general welfare सबको मिलना चाहिए, but what is the incentive that any political stakeholder has?
Yeah, I think we have to just view it from a basic, point of view of human dignity and humanity, because these are populations who come to the city, who build your city, who and अभी lockdown में जब हमारे maids नहीं आए या हमारे drivers नहीं आए, तो सबको पता चल रहा था कि उनका importance क्या है. तो I think just recognizing the value of their labor and providing dignity and security for them, I think it's a very humanitarian appeal. Again, I should also add that it's not always that all migrant workers who come to the city actually want to go back to their source state. A lot of them are also interested in settling down. So a lot of them will also become a potential voting population. Like for example, जो ओडिया migrants की मैंने बात की, तो वोट डालने वाला एक शहरी गरीब वाला जो वर्ग है, उसके भी वो हिस्सा हो जाते हैं 20-30 साल, 35 साल, 40 साल के जो ड्यूरेशन में. तो ऐसा भी नहीं है कि कोई पॉलिटिकल इंसेंटिव नहीं है. तो अगर आप एक पॉलिटिकल कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंसी को कल्टीवेट करना चाहते हैं, तो डेफिनेटली देयर इज अ पॉलिटिकल इंसेंटिव देयर आल्सो, बट इट इज स्टिल अ वेरी, आई थिंक फ्रॉम माय पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू, इट्स अ वेरी ह्यूमैनिटेरियन काइंड ऑफ अपील in terms of their rights, the human rights of these people who actually come to your city and build your city. Nivedita, if you want to add something there.
Yeah, and also from just the perspective of urbanization and urban planning, right? Like there are scores of migrants coming into the cities and they're going to just increase, but like our urbanization rates are so low. how are we going to accommodate, like if you look at Ahmedabad as a city, for instance, you'll see migrants across pavements, across flyovers, on all kinds of plots of land. Like how a city is going to be prepared for this kind of entry of increasing kind of entry of migrants into the city, in terms of like interestingly, when for the one time that urban local bodies actually get very interested in serving migrant populations is when there's a public health crisis. So there's always, even though they claim not to know that there are migrants in the city or where they live, when they they have to do like the mosquito fumigation, they're always kind of there, or when they have to like vaccinate against infectious diseases or do that kind of disease control, they're always available. So I mean, going forward, when more and more migrants enter the city, and in cities like Ahmedabad, which is so high growth, recognized as fastest growing kind of cities in internationally actually, how is the city going to actually be able to handle this kind of so like but again, everything, a policy is again short-sighted. It doesn't look at like long-term perspectives. So
right, when we're talking of like these rights and policies, recently labor laws were at least there's an ordinance to regularize or remove labor laws, right? 38 laws को हटाने के लिए अभी यूपी and MP government ने at least बात की है. तो उसके बारे में what are your views कि how helpful were they for the laborers? तो till what extent did they protect them? अगर वो हटा दिए जाते हैं, how is it going to impact them? How, and positively, negatively, both? Like, so what are your views on that?
So labor laws are actually applicable to informal, casual migrant workers. So there's this critique of labor laws saying, oh, nobody comes under its ambit, like only 10% workers are covered. But actually, technically, they can be applicable for migrant workers, for informal workers. What happens is that their implementation is very faulty. But so like in most units where migrants work, or casual kind of contractual workers end up not being able to demand their rights under these legislations, even though they're covered for it. But that's a fault with implementation. Taking the law away entirely does not serve any purpose. And what has been happening is that labor departments, which should be implementing all of these kinds of legislations, should be monitoring factories. Those have been kind of disempowered since the 90s. Like their funding has been taken away. Like you'll find one labor inspector for like 1,000 factories, for instance. It's almost impossible, and there's no incentive to do it. But again, a labor inspectorate system, which can kind of help, labor inspectors to make sure that certain welfare provisioning, certain safety standards are met in work units. They're kind of, under the current labor codes, they've been totally dismantled, because again, the narrative is that, labor inspectors are corrupt. But how many inspections have there been on the basis of which we can say that there's an inspector Raj in, labor inspector Raj in the country? And if it is corrupt, there are ways to make it more, accountable. There can be structures for top-down accountability. There can be civil society and kind of trade union representation in like monitoring of industrial areas to be able to do this. So the entire kind of intention of labor kind of reforms agenda that we're seeing now, with many states kind of taking a holiday from like labor laws for like 2-3 years, is that they basically just want to allow industries to have free rein to extract workers, to be able to produce more cheaply. And that has become a strategy now for economic revival, like especially like post-lockdown. Now, how can it be that, marginalizing already marginalized populations further kind of endangering their wage rights, their rights to safety, because these are very hazardous industries. If you look at construction, if you look at factories, very, very hazardous kind of industries where migrants work. It's okay, safety standards are still not met regardless of existing legislations, but there was always options for organizations such as us, for labor movements, to actually utilize these laws. And we have utilized these laws in many instances. When wage laws and wage payment laws are in operation, our legal aid work can actually help a lot of migrants get back their wages. But now it has been legitimized, like what wage frauds already exist in the economy has now been normalized, legitimized by law, by taking away the law itself. So yeah, what it has done is that even if you want to, now you can't access that kind of labor protection. And it has been totally normalized to extract workers. And that has become the operating logic of economic growth now.
Right. Yeah, Divya, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make this slightly kind of philosophical point that अभी जो I think जिस तरीके से migrant community को view किया जा रहा है, it's basically just viewing them as a factor of production in this whole economic process of economic growth and economic production. So उनको just एक factor of production की तरह view किया जा रहा है, ना कि as human beings who really have needs and rights and who have families to take care of, who are actually not in cities in the best of conditions. So unke jo, even when they're trying to go back, I think people are viewing them as carriers of infection and virus. But what are the conditions in our cities where these people are living? And if one were to imagine oneself in their shoes, and whether you would be comfortable like sharing a toilet between 100 people, like would that be a comfortable situation for you? Wouldn't you want to go back to your villages? So I think jo general jo ek mahal hai in terms of not just in relation to the labor laws, but also in relation to the whole kind of this policy panic and policy response on how migrant workers are being viewed. I think because trains are being cancelled, like in Karnataka abhi to restart kar diya, but trains are being cancelled after discussion with the builders lobby. So basically unko ek just एक factor of production की तरफ view किया जा रहा है, which I think is just deplorable.
Yeah, I think the travel versus क्या उन्हें वहीं पे काम देना चाहिए जिस स्टेट में वो हैं, should they be made to stay there for some time, for another month or two and not be sent home, ताकि economic conditions hamper ना हो for the country. I think that is an ongoing debate जो चल रहा है कि what should and I think it should be the laborer's choice वो कहाँ रहना चाहते हैं and not a forceful mandate कि आपको यहीं रहना है ताकि ये industry चल पाए. So yeah, I think that's another ongoing debate on that. I think a next question from Ananya is that the National Urban Health Mission includes provision for health resource centers and outreach programs with a special mention of migrant workers. तो इसका आपने impact कोई देखा है क्या on the ground? क्योंकि on paper है mentioned, but have you seen this impacted on the ground?
Yeah, in our kind of policy analysis, we have also found that, public health and sanitation kind of policies and the whole architecture is much more sensitive to the presence of migrants in cities. Because wahan pe aur powers hai city shahri governments ko kuch programs बनाने का in order to relocate staff, कुछ budgeting को लेकर powers है उनके पास. So for example, the ANM and ASHA worker, even though we said that they are not incentivized to provide to migrant workers, but they're actually empowered to add settlements to their existing kind of case sheet. There might be like a particular set of settlements that each ASHA worker or ANM actually caters to, but they are actually empowered to add more settlements if they find that there are more populations that are in need of these services. But why would an ASHA worker add to her existing caseload? So she's already they're already overworked and stretched, and their incentives are very poor. So why would they just undertake another additional survey and add additional kind of settlements to their own kind of areas? So again, powers are there in these public health schemes, but incentives are not very well structured there. Again, Swachh Bharat Mission may be refreshingly public or private toilets can be actually installed irrespective of tenure security. So जिन settlements में, जिन बस्तियों में tenure security नहीं है, वहाँ पर भी toilets, शौचालय actually install किया जा सकता है स्वच्छ भारत मिशन के अंतर्गत. तो definitely I think that's a very good question, that public health and sanitation schemes are more kind of sensitive to their needs. But वही intent के बारे में भी थोड़ा सोचना पड़ेगा. Like Nivedita was saying earlier that there is a this view that migrants are a public health threat. And for example, we've seen this even in Kerala, even in such a enlightened kind of status like Kerala, because उनको वहाँ बहुत डर लगता है कि the kind of gains that Kerala has made in public health will be actually brought brought back because of some of these, because of the presence of migrants, that they are carriers of diseases and all of this. So wo nahi pata ki intent is intent basically the right one, or is it more guided by this thought that migrant workers might be carriers of infection and might be a threat to public health?
I think we'll take one last question, because ye conversations I think can be ongoing for a very long.
Sure.
We'll take one or two last ones, I think. Ek to ye hai ki when we're talking of rights and policies, so just top of the mind, which are some rights that are extremely important right now for the migrant laborers? And if you're saying ki agar kuch laws repeal ho rahe hain, so which are the ones you think should be kept top of the priority order, agar koi aise hai? So legislation wise, rights wise.
I think the laws on occupational safety and health, right? Because a lot of states are now allowing new units to come up, which will not have to follow safety standards. And even within the occupational health and safety code, they are kind of a lot of units are being exempt from, like 85% of all of units which are unorganized kind of sector units will be exempt from kind of following any kind of safety standards. So these are very hazardous industries, and this means like permanent disability, death of migrant workers, and probably the only earning members in their households. So that is one law that cannot go, and in fact has to be strengthened to be applicable across units, even the smaller units. So then in that case, we have to think about how small micro survivalist enterprises can be made safe, and a lot of them supply to like bigger retail brands, and how we can help like retail brands kind of invest in the safety within like these small units that they source from. Another very important law is the wage laws, which kind of protects workers from arbitrary deductions from their wages. Now that is also kind of being repealed in many states in many forms, and also in the wage code that has already been enacted, which is very dangerous, because this 300 rupee minimum wage that they get is also now being threatened. So kind of reinstating all the provisions of that, and reinstating particularly the policy where the principal employer is going to be held liable for payment of wages and for providing other kind of safety and welfare provisions to workers. Because now a lot of burden is being placed on contractors, but these are petty contractors, and they actually can't afford to pay for workers. We saw that during the lockdown also. We got lots of distress calls from workers whose employers were not even providing them with rations, even though they were still in their work sites unable to leave, because they are contractual workers, and they kind of said it's the responsibility of the labor contractor. When we contacted like the city administrations in those spaces, they also made the contractors kind of sign letters saying that they'll provide rations. But how is a contractor, small contractor who was probably a worker himself, kind of provide for 5,000, 6,000 workers, for instance? So placing again liability on the principal employer, on the builder, or on the factory owner, or on the retailer to which smaller units kind of supply is very important. Now that clause in the Payment of Wages Act and in the Occupational Safety and Health Act have been taken away, and a lot of emphasis has been put on contractors who won't be able to provide any of this. So these laws are going to be completely unimplementable. So kind of looking at both of these.
Great. I think like as a last ending comment, what is like general public awareness, right, around different issues related to circular migrants and migration? So just if there is a question from Sabrish as well, ki hasn't the narrative that unionization of workers is a barrier to improving productivity, hasn't that narrative led or played a huge part in the current situation or the way it is? So what do you think citizens should be doing? Civil society organizations and citizens hai, in general awareness, in understanding more about these issues, what should we be doing? And if there is a call to action that you have ki hame साथ में मिलकर ये करना है, which will help improve this situation, what is it that you'd suggest? For both of you, if you can both answer this.
Yeah, I think that, as individual citizens, I think first and foremost, ensure that all the informal workers that you are dependent on are actually paid wages in time. I think that's a very fundamental thing that I've seen violated so many times in so many cases during this lockdown. Just middle class societies, a lot of people are not paying their house helps or drivers or gardeners or who probably could not come to work because of the lockdown. So I think at a fundamental level, your personal responsibility towards the people with whom you have an employment relationship, I think that needs to be fulfilled. So many cases of pending wages and forced kind of firing we've seen during this lockdown. At a societal level, definitely, I think spreading awareness about the contributions made by migrant workers and the conditions in which they are having to migrate from their source areas. It's either agrarian distress or deforestation or climate change. A lot of these koi apne marzi se, if anybody had a choice, they would stay back in their homes, they would stay back in their villages. It's because it's such a dire situation of poverty and deprivation there that people are actually choosing to migrate. So some awareness, I think, about the conditions that are driving people to come to these cities and undertake such work. And in general, I think हमारी भी जो कल्पना है in terms of the legitimacy of citizenship and कौन citizen है, कौन नागरिक है, कौन नहीं है. So this binary is how we think in, right? कि कौन insider है, कौन outsider है, कौन citizen है, कौन migrant है. तो ये binary थोड़ा सा हमें I think remove करना चाहिए. All of us, at least within India, are citizens, and the Constitution actually gives us right to move, freedom to move from one part of the country to another. So recognizing that their presence in our cities is legitimate, recognizing the role that they are playing in actually building our cities, I think those can be good starting points.
And just to add to that, we're all consumers as well, right? And most of what we wear or what we use in our homes is made by migrant labor who are paid very, very little for, what they make, probably in very unsafe conditions. So there's a lot of consumer activism also, particularly in the garments industry, but in other industries as well, kind of trying to participate in that because labor is so invisible to us. There's so much dehumanizing of, like workers, and doubly so of migrant workers. For instance, if on a construction site that I was once doing a research on, a lot of people who were buying flats came to view their flats while the construction was ongoing, but labor and the conditions in which they were living, the conditions in which the children of migrant labor were living was totally invisible to them. I think this pandemic has kind of brought humanity to migrant workers in our consciousness, and we shouldn't forget that once the lockdown is over, and trying to keep that alive in public kind of consciousness is really important right
Yeah.
now.
Thank you both for that. And I think we'll leave it with this thought कि I'm sure there are multiple challenges जो आप लोगों ने face किए हैं, and that is one angle जो हमने बात नहीं की of personally what challenges you all face, and maybe we'll talk about that in another session, somewhere else about on Twitter, and engage in this conversation moving forward, so that इस पे भी थोड़ा एक light आए कि what are personal challenges that you all are facing, and how do we look at migrant labor, and where is the empathy and the humanity in this whole conversation? And so thank you so much for throwing light on all of these extremely important issues. I'm sure it was a very informative session. At Intersection, we've been trying to work with the communities that we serve in the education network, jo our team mein, the communities we're in touch with, to ensure basic access to like food, healthcare, and whether they're receiving the direct benefit transfers or not. And we started working with migrant labor in a few places, and there, like, that's when I think we got an exposure to what you've been doing for the longest time. So more power to you, and I think we're all in this together, so thanks a lot. Is it okay if we share your email address with the people who've been part of the chat today? Because there are people who want to help. Some people have requested that they can reach out.
Yeah, definitely. Please do. Yeah, yeah, please.
Great.
Thank you, Madhuri, for the opportunity, and thank you, Intersection and Tarun, for the connections. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Yeah. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for participating. Thanks. Have a nice evening.